From their early days in Liverpool to conquering the world, the Beatles have left an indelible mark on music history. But what made their singles iconic? The Beatles were not just musicians, they were cultural icons. Their ability to evolve musically kept them ahead of the curve, resonating with audiences across generations. Their popularity surged with each release because their songs captured the spirit of the times and offered something for everyone. From their rebellious rock and roll of twist and shout to the introspective lyrics of yesterday, the music was always fresh and always relevant. The Beatles are not just the best-selling band in the UK, but globally. Their innovative approach to recording, combined with their charismatic performances, set them apart. According to the Guinness Book of Records, they've sold more than 600 million units worldwide, making them the best-selling band of all time. In the UK alone, their singles have broken numerous records, including the recent release of Now and Then in 2023. This single not only reached number one, but also became the fastest-selling single of the year, proving that Beatlemania is still very much alive. So although you probably know every Beatles single there is, I thought it would be interesting to detail the single releases in a video. Let me start from the beginning then. The Beatles' first UK single, believe it or not, was My Bonnie, recorded with Tony Sheridan and credited as Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers in Germany. But it was later released in the UK as Tony Sheridan and the Beatles. And although it peaked at number 48, it would mark the start of something extraordinary. It was this record that led Brian Epstein to discover and eventually manage the Beatles. Their official debut as the Beatles came with Love Me Do, which was released October the 5th, 1962. It reached number 17 on the charts and sold around 100,000 copies. The B-side was P.S. I Love You, a track that would showcase their early charm. Ringo played drums on the original single version, but on subsequent versions, session drummer Andy White was used with Ringo playing tambourine. Next was Please Please Me, which soared to number 2 and stayed in the charts for 20 weeks, selling approximately 250,000 copies. The B-side, Ask Me Why. This song was originally a slow, bluesy number until George Martin suggested speeding it up, leading to its iconic lively tempo. From there, the hits kept coming. From Me to You was their first number one and was released on April 11th, 1963. 9 days later, it kicked off a 21-week run in the British charts, reaching number one on the 4th of May, a position it would retain for 7 weeks and sold over 900,000 copies with its B-side, Thank You Girl. George Martin said, I asked them for another song as good as Please Please Me, and they brought me one, From Me to You. There seemed to be a bottomless well of songs. Now, the Beatles wrote this song while on tour with Helen Shapiro. The title was inspired by the From You to Us letters section in the New Musical Express magazine. On August the 23rd, 1963, She Loves You was released and became a massive hit, staying at number one for 31 weeks. 31 weeks! Do you think the radio listening public were getting tired of it by the end of its run? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It sold 1,890,000 copies, so probably not. The B-side was I'll Get You. Known for its famous yeah, yeah, yeah hook, it's said that the song was inspired by Bobby Rydell's Forget Him, and its upbeat nature helped it to become a massive hit. On November 29th, 1963, I Want to Hold Your Hand was released, which also went to number one and sold over 1,750,000 copies, with This Boy on the B-side. This was the first Beatles single recorded on 4-track equipment, which allowed for greater production complexity. Following these, Can't Buy Me Love was released March the 20th, 1964, peaking at number one and selling over 1,520,000 copies, with its B-side, You Can't Do That. Recorded in Paris, this was one of the few Beatles songs not recorded at Abbey Road, and Paul came up with the melody while on tour. Hard Day's Night was released on July the 10th, 1964. Also hit number one with Things We Said Today on the B-side. The title was coined by Ringo Starr after a long day of filming the movie of the same name. The song's opening chord is one of the most famous in rock history. I Feel Fine, released on November the 27th, 64, topped the charts as well, with She's a Woman on the B-side, selling over 1,410,000 copies. Now, I Feel Fine is known for its distinctive guitar feedback at the beginning, which is considered one of the first uses of deliberate feedback in a pop song. The Beatles were on a dominating roll, and the success continued with Ticket to Ride, released April the 9th, 1965, reaching number one, selling over 1,220,000 copies with its B-side Yes It Is. The song features a unique rhythm described by John as heavy for its time, and is one of the first Beatles tracks to exceed 3 minutes in length. Help was released less than 2 months later on the 23rd of July 1965, reaching number one and selling over 900,000 copies with its B-side, I'm Down. John wrote the song, as we know, as a literal cry for help during a difficult period in his life. It was originally a slower, more melancholic song before he turned it into a pop anthem. Now, you keep hearing me talk about B-sides, and I'm pretty sure that management were carefully selecting the songs for the B-sides. We know that often B-side singles are hidden gems, songs that sometimes never make it on an album, and in some cases the B-side fares much better than the A-side, at least to the public's listening ears. Think Queen, We Are the Champions, and the single had We Will Rock You on the B-side, which in itself became more of an anthem and as memorable as the A-side. Thankfully, both of these songs featured on the album News of the World. Now, there's also the case of a band who were struggling for success until a DJ kept playing the B-side over and over, and that broke the band into the mainstream. Now, I can't remember the name of the band or the single. Maybe it's Folklore, you know. If you've heard of this, drop me a comment. Remind me who the band was. But what about double A-sides? Well, the Beatles were the first to issue a double A-side with We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper. Their label, EMI, announced that We Can Work It Out would be the A-side. But then John, who preferred his own composition, said a couple of days later that Day Tripper would be the A-side. And so for the first double A-side, We Can Work It Out, Day Tripper, was released on December the 3rd, 1965, topped the charts and sold over 1,390,000 copies. Paperback Writer was released on June the 10th, 66, hitting number one, selling over 760,000 copies with Rain on the B-side. Now, the song's lyrics were said to have been inspired by Paul's Auntie Lil, who had asked him if he could write a song that wasn't about love. The next double A-side was Yellow Submarine, Eleanor Rigby, released August the 5th, 1966, again reaching number one and selling over 500,000 copies. Now, the iconic Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever double A-side was released February the 17th, 1967, peaking at number two with sales of 400,000. Now, if a single is split as a double A-side, then the sales figures are also split. You'd think that wouldn't be the case, right? But the sales of a single were divided between both sides. And as a result, Engelbert's Humperdinck's Release Me technically registered more sales, and so kept the Beatles, probably their greatest single, off the number one slot. Now, these two songs reflected the childhood memories of Paul and John respectively, with vivid, surreal imagery. All You Need Is Love, released July the 7th, 1967, topped the charts with Baby You're a Rich Man on the B-side, selling over 600,000 copies. Now, this song premiered on the first global satellite broadcast, Our World, and the anthem was written by John and became a symbol of the 1967 Summer of Love. Another hit, Hello Goodbye, released November the 24th, 1967, reached number one, selling over 900,000 copies, and the B-side was I Am the Walrus. Hello Goodbye, written by Paul, was inspired by a word game he played with Alistair Taylor, where he would say the opposite of each word Paul said. Now, I can't validate that quote. I did read that Paul had been asked by Alistair, how do you write a song? And Paul had taken him, they were in Paul's house, he'd taken him into Paul's music room. He jumped on the harmonium and said, whatever word I say, you say the opposite. Hello, goodbye. Yes, no. We know the song, right? So it was born out of a discussion with Alistair Taylor, who later in an interview said that he had no recollection of this, but Paul has talked about it. Lady Madonna, released on March the 15th, 1968, hit #1, selling over 600,000 copies, with The Inner Light on the B-side. This song is said to be influenced by Fats Domino and features a boogie-woogie piano style and is said to celebrate the resilience of motherhood. Hey Jude, released August 30th, 68, became a massive success, reaching #1 and selling over 1 million copies. Its B-side was Revolution, as we know, originally titled Hey Jules, written by Paul for John's son Julian during the parents' divorce, and became a much-loved Beatles anthem. Get Back, released April the 11th, 69, was also #1, selling 800,000 copies, with Don't Let Me Down on the B-side. Then came The Ballad of John and Yoko, released May 30th, 69, again reaching #1 and selling 600,000 copies, with the B-side Old Brown Shoe. Now, both of these songs were non-album songs, harking back to their early single releases where songs were not found on the albums. Another double A-side then, Something and Come Together, released October the 31st, 1969, peaking at #4 and selling 300,000 copies. As we know, Something was praised by Frank Sinatra as one of the best love songs ever written, although it's often reported with him saying that Lennon and McCartney had ever written. But we know that. Come Together, written by John, and featured a laid-back groove and cryptic lyrics. I still haven't worked them out. Finally, Let It Be, released March the 6th, 1970, reached #2, selling over 300,000 copies, with the B-side You Know My Name, Look Up My Number. Written by Paul, this song is said to have been inspired by a dream about his late mother Mary, and became one of the band's most enduring hymns and hope. Now, when we talk about anthems and, enduring songs, as a football supporter, I obviously watch Match of the Day, and I watch live matches and FA Cup and all of this kind of stuff. And often after a match, a side that's won, you hear the atmosphere of the stadium with the cheers, and you hear na 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 na, and they're playing Hey Jude. It's getting weekly airplay at football stadiums. It's all good stuff. Now, I've covered the releases from their original release date. I haven't looked into any singles that were subsequently released, and I'm sure they were. I've got it in my head that, maybe in the 70s, some Beatles songs were re-released, and the 80s, maybe even the 90s. So all of the facts and figures I've kind of provided were from that period, the original release dates. So not all of the singles reached #1, but nonetheless they did enter the charts and would contribute to record sales, as well as keeping the band alive in the social consciousness. Fast forward to 2023, and the Beatles released Now and Then, which became their 18th UK #1 single. It sold 78,200 combined units in its first week, proving that Beatlemania is still very much alive. Now, in this video, you can take a look at the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band that I created, and all of the characters on the album cover. On this playlist are all of my Beatles-related videos, which include cover songs, as well as Beatles-related walkabouts. That's it then. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye for now.